Coming to you straight from the Rio Grande and beyond. Broadcasting to the four corners of the globe. So grab your seat, your coffee, or your sundowner.
Okay, everybody, here we go.
On point, as always. This is Gloves Off. Gloves Off.
I'm going to go ahead and start it. In fact, if people come in, we'll just sit them down and we'll take off from that. Number one, I want to thank Pastor for allowing us to use your church. And I want to thank you all in Appleseed, every single one of you for coming down here. And a lot of the community that was supposed to come and so on and so forth is the questions that they ask is, number one, is this really happening here in Laredo? Second, what is a school to prison pipeline district? Second, what if it is, what are the policies? Or is it just bad parenting? And that's the consensus of the major questions that are around. So I want to thank you all for being here, and go ahead, please come in and start.
Sure. Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure, totally. I was joking, my father's a minister, so I feel at home in so many ways. I'm Andrew Hairston, and I direct the Education Justice Project. I'm so honored to be here with my colleagues Reina Carregue and Myra Fierro. Texas Appleseed is a statewide nonprofit organization that focuses on dismantling unjust laws and policies that impact millions of Texans across the state. So to Paul's grounding questions, does the school to prison pipeline affect folks in Laredo? Absolutely. It affects kids everywhere, across Texas, across the U.S. And it's a quite pernicious system that we'll talk about more. But in our 27-year history at Texas Appleseed, we have developed expertise around the school to prison pipeline in particular. We do some work on other project areas like fair housing and disaster recovery, fair financial services access, criminal justice reform, and youth justice reform for young people in the Texas Juvenile Justice Department. But the School to Prison Pipeline Project, or the education justice work, has been near and dear to the organization's heart because our boss, Deborah Fowler, soon after she started at the organization in 2005, really launched into research around this work, right? So we'll talk more about what the school to prison pipeline is. I kind of often think of it as a twofold pillar, right? On one pillar you have traditional forms of school push out. Kids are suspended, they're put into alternative education programs, they're expelled, right? But then you also have school policing and that impact, right? And so as Paul was teeing us up before the meeting began, the idea that young people could be out in their community, they could be at the mall over the weekend, and then school police officers can still get involved with that discipline because of the overreach of the system, right? And when school police officers often get involved in discipline, they will arrest young people, issue tickets, and entangle them more deeply into the criminal legal system than would have occurred even a generation ago. So it's very much so that focus, right? The alternative education programs, suspensions, expulsions, the presence of school police officers, and then generally the zero tolerance philosophy, right? That young people need to be brought to heel. You might often hear policymakers say, right? And, I appreciate that grounding that Paul offered, right? A lot of people, a lot of parents in their generation might say, is it particularly this bad? Like, are the kids this bad? I would argue that the circumstances have been consistently bad, right? It's not that the children are bad, nor the parents who are raising them, but it's these very hard systems where kids are expected to be seen and not heard, where any type of disobedience is met with push out of their classrooms, the use of suspensions, and then the use of school policing to clamp down on what I would argue is the true freedom of young people to express academic interests, their extracurricular interests, and just be children. So yeah, that is just like the overview of Texas Appleseed. We'll talk more about some of our history and our work, but I'll pass it to Renika to share more about the harms of the school prison pipeline.
Hi everyone. My name is Renika Reagan. I am a policy advisor at Texas Appleseed on our Education Justice Project. And like Andrew said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the harms of the school to prison pipeline and why we work on it and why it's so important that we need to address it. So, there are decades of research behind all the things that I'm going to be talking about today. These policies had started to be implemented in the 90s all across the country, and so we have decades of experience, and we can see the data, we can see the outcomes. And as he said, this is something that has happened all over the country. So one of the things that we've seen is that these policies are not actually effective at their intent. So they're not really effective at addressing students' behavior. The reason for this is because when you just remove a student from the classroom or remove a student from school, then you're not addressing what's causing them to act out in the first place. Almost all the time, there's something that's underlying that child's behavior, whether it's that they are having mental health struggles, or they're having instability at home, or they have an emotional disability sometimes. Whatever it is, just taking them out for a certain period of time and then coming back in is not addressing those underlying causes of their behavior. Because we know that kids aren't born bad. There's always something that they're trying to communicate by acting out. Also, removing students from school by suspension, expulsion, that kind of thing doesn't teach them how to improve. It doesn't teach them what they should do in the future and what they should do next time. So kids, we all know they need to learn social skills, they need to learn emotional skills, how to build relationships, how to act. And school is the best place for them to learn that, right? Because it's a social setting where they're around their peers, they're around adults. It's the best place for them to learn those skills. But when we take them out of that, they've lost any chance to improve on that. So what we've seen is when kids are pushed out of school, it doesn't improve behavior in the future. But not only that, it also has really life-changing harmful effects on kids who are removed from school. So you can just imagine logically when a child is removed from school over and over, they start to disengage from academics, right? They start to think that, school isn't really the place for me, I'm falling further and further behind. So they end up, and then research has shown like it actually increases the likelihood of repeating a grade and then dropping out of school entirely. And then we know how harmful dropping out of school can be because it affects your ability to earn income in the future, it affects your educational prospect in the future. So these types of practices have really harmful effects on kids in the future. Not only that, but it increases their likelihood of getting involved in the juvenile justice system and criminal justice system, right? So one way is what Andrew described, that the police officers are right there. So any behavior can be seen as a crime, right? So let's say two kids are getting into an argument, it gets into a little bit of a scuffle, automatically it can be an assault if a police officer is there, and then that leads to more and more consequences down the road. But also, when they're out of school, right, like when they're suspended or expelled, it's easier to get involved in trouble, right? When you're not at school, you might get involved in something else. So that's kind of some of the harmful effects. And then another really important thing is if we look nationally, like demographically, we know that this has a disproportionate impact on students of color, so Black and brown students, and students with disabilities. And so, unfortunately, we're pushing out some of our kids who might need the most help. We're pushing them out at a greater rate. So those are some of the harmful effects. Andrew also mentioned the important part about there being a huge police presence in our schools. And I talked a little bit how like any behavior can be seen as a crime. If you're a police officer, that's how you deal with issues, right? Is oftentimes arrests and charges. But also there's a lot of examples, and you may have seen like viral videos across the country of times when officers unfortunately use excessive force, right? Because maybe, Paul was talking about earlier that unfortunately some of the bad apples end up being filtered into the school, and they're not necessarily trained to understand how children act out and how children behave, and so they might react with excessive force And this causes a lot of trauma to young kids who are still developing and growing. So these are some of the harms of it and why we work on it. But I want to turn it over to my colleague, Maida, to talk about, look, we've talked about why this is a problem, but what could we do instead, right? Because we know kids are having behavior issues. We know kids are still learning and growing, but how should we deal with that, right? We're not just saying, just don't do anything, let them do whatever they want, because obviously that's not the solution. So I'll turn it over.
Hello everyone, I'm Mayra Fierro, and what we can do instead of, I guess, just arresting children is focus more on restorative practices, which means things like building relationships among students and teachers to help prevent some of that conflict before it actually occurs, and then holding the students meaningfully accountable for their actions. And it often involves them actually repairing the harm that they've caused. So there is consequences to their actions. But we also need mental health supports, which would look like hiring more school counselors, psychologists, and social workers within the school districts, having trauma-informed practices to de-escalate situations, also being children-focused, knowing the different developmental stages of children and how their brain is developing. Social emotional learning, which means just basically teaching kids social skills, how to not get into arguments, how to express and regulate their emotions. Just like we teach reading and writing and math, we can teach them how to control their emotions. Special education services. A student may have a disability that's unidentified and not appropriately being served, which we know causes behavior issues. Something else that I'd like to share with you all, we could be treating vaping, instead of treating it as a criminal issue, we could treat it as a public health issue and an education issue. I'm a community organizer and I am based in Dallas, but I'm also lucky enough to have been here in the summer at United ISD for a student leadership summit. And I got to hear from the students for what they presented as possible solutions to the vaping situation. And what they said is that they wanted to see students educated about the harmful effects of vaping, including that vapes are unregulated and they contain unknown substances. And of course the impacts on mental health. Also being able to support the emotional struggles that students have that leads them to vape, which may be teaching students meditation or other stress management techniques, providing, again, mental health supports and services. And something that the students really clamored for was creating peer support groups around mental health issues. Texas Appleseed also recommends, targeting the actual sellers of the vapes, especially those who advertise to young children.
Back at you, gloves off, and today we have a great group of guests that we have in here from all over Texas, Houston, Dallas, Austin, and it's the Texas Appleseed Foundation. And what are we talking about? School to prison pipeline. And why are we talking about that? Very simple, because everybody thinks that it's a myth, it's an urban legend, doesn't exist, happens elsewhere, it doesn't happen here in Laredo. Number one, thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for driving all over.
Yes.
We had a presentation earlier that was awesome. It was awesome. We learned a lot. Those that didn't go, you missed out. But believe me, we have enough people that are trying to figure out. But number one question for everybody out there: explain what a school to prison pipeline is.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. I'm Andrew Hairston, and my colleagues Renika Reggae and Mara Fierro and I are so honored to be with you, Paul. The school to prison pipeline, as I like to define it, is a patchwork of laws and policies that are designed to target students, particularly those who are underserved, Black and brown children, LGBTQ young people, and kids with disabilities most often, for age-appropriate routine behavior. And instead of providing supports for the young people when perceived misbehavior occurs, these laws and policies push them out of their classrooms and into contact with the criminal, legal, and juvenile justice system.
And a lot of people, when we've been talking about, they say a school to prison pipeline is not really is a piece of thing that really doesn't exist, Paul. What are you talking about? The kids are bad kids. This is what people say. Kids are bad kids. Kids are how can I put it? they're the ones that are doing bad. All the blame is towards the kids. All the blame is towards single moms, the deadbeat fathers. That's the consensus of what I hear, not only from the police, from the principals, from the counselors, from everybody over and over. It's that circle that's there that's like they're stuck in the mud. They don't want to admit that there might be issues like policies and laws, and they're overreaching their boundaries, in other words. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. So the way that we would respond to that is that when the schools have a responsibility to educate the kids in all different ways, right? So not only their academic skills, but also their social skills and teaching them how to become members of society when they grow up into adults. And the school system is also responsible for how they respond to student misbehavior. Like, kids are always going to act up, they're always going to make mistakes, and there's always a reason behind that. But it's the school's responsibility to figure out what is the reason behind that and how can we address it, rather than just reacting punitively and just pushing them out of the school system or pushing them into the criminal legal system. Figuring out how can we actually help kids to learn and grow and become successful adults. Because at the end of the day, they are all going to grow into adults, and we want to make sure that everyone's prepared to succeed at that point in time. And we can't just, cast kids away whenever they make a mistake.
Absolutely. We also, folks, we're going live because we've got Corner News here, we've got Parents United as well, and they came to see what I was talking about for so many months, and they understand it very well what's happening. It's not one particular school district. They're just things that occur, that continue. One might have it more than the other. There's no blame. What happens is sometimes we adapt policy because everybody else is doing it. So let's follow the fad, and all of a sudden everybody comes off the cliff. But that's what I think is happening, because we've got some good people on the boards. We've got some good people that are working up there. We've got some excellent teachers and educators and principals. And when you're thrown into something there, you might not be able to, step back and reclaim it without a type of road out to fix it. What would be the road outs here? Is it policy? Is it law? What is it? Or both?
I think it's a little bit of everything, right? And that reflects our model at Texas Appleseed. We're a public interest justice center that's operated since 1996. Our 27th anniversary is this year. And we have generally engaged with advocacy to change unjust laws and policies that impact historically underserved Texans. And we do it through community outreach, through legal and policy research, and through data analysis. We put out a number of reports on these issues across the decades, but we found what is most significant in our work is being able to connect with directly impacted folks across the state, to have these very enriching conversations with parent organizers like we did tonight, and to work in coalitions to try to really tackle these intractable, difficult issues.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that, I'll say that a really important piece of it is a culture shift. Because we can change what's written in the policy, but that doesn't mean that people are actually going to change what they do. Yeah. What you really need to do is educate people and change, how people say change their hearts and minds. It's implementing that culture shift so that people will actually start to change what they do, and then they'll be able to follow any new policies that we put in place.
And you're absolutely correct when you say you have to change your hearts and mind. You are what you think. Whatever you think, if you think positively, you're going to do positive things. If you say every kid is bad, then every kid is going to be bad in your eyes. If you say every parent is bad, and if you have that culture already embedded in you over and over, year after year, that's what you're thinking. And you're exactly correct. We have to change that. And What You Think is a good book, if you guys want to read one. And out there too, pick it up, because it's actually a book that will give you a positive thought, because what you think, eventually you are going to do. And so if you're thinking that every kid's a bad kid, every kid is a kid that should not be around others and so on and so forth, well, guess what's going to happen? You're going to go after that kid.
Yeah, and we do see, unfortunately, that some kids end up being targeted, and so they're the ones that any little thing they do, let's say they talk too loud or something, they're the ones that end up getting in trouble, and they're the ones that you see in and out of the alternative school. And unfortunately, that's really no fault of their own. It's just that in the mind of the administration or whoever's in charge, they're seen as the bad kid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If anybody has any questions, put in there, share, comment. If you guys have any questions inside, ask us, because that's where we're going to take off. You guys heard the presentation, and just let us know.
I did want to address this issue that you raised, Paul, that I think has come up a lot in my work and our work over the years. Like, there's a lot of pathologizing. Like, it's the family units themselves, right? It's the single parent households. It's the absent parents, right? And that is starting at the absolutely wrong unit of analysis from our point of view, right? You have to contend with some large structures that are in place, and they have been for a long time. In some of my presentations in the past, I've referenced the Moynihan report. Moynihan was a cabinet secretary across the Johnson and Nixon administrations, and he wrote a report on the black family in the 60s and 70s, right, that covers a lot of issues, but in part kind of talks about black families kind of facing woes because of the prevalence of single-family households, right? If you examine U.S. history, if you examine contemporary politics, you know that that is not at all quite addressing why folks are facing so many deprivations of their rights right now. Like, these systems of racism, of other, forms of othering people, right? Like, these are the true causes of a lot of hindrances of people to achieve their full potential, and that I'm very grateful for my colleagues and for our organization to be able to engage in that culture shifting work, as Ranika was saying, and really be fighting to have the good laws and books, good laws on the books, pardon me, but also try to say that it's not any individual's fault that they are facing underwater circumstances in the year 2023. Like, so much is like flooding them. We're doing our best to lift the tide for everybody to make sure that they can breathe.
Sure.
But I do want to always push folks to not think about individual family units as the cause of problems.
And you make a very good point, because that culture that has been embedded, you see that with the principals, like I said, you see that with the counselors, you see that with the teachers, you see that with the police of a particular school district. You see that they were harboring the fact that, well, guess what? It's the single parent kid. The problem is he's a bad kid, and he's a bad kid because he has a deadbeat father. That was resonated throughout the whole thing. And to me, I was like, really? And then they also had this idea of profiling. If you were caught walking 2 and more, you were considered a gang. And you already got your warning because you went to the alternative school. So your second warning, they were going to put you on a list, and they were going to give it to the police. So what are you doing? That's called white tagging somebody, white paper tagging, white tagging, white note tagging. And those issues that occur with a white tagging of elements in police happens all the time. They'll come up to you and they'll say, "Oh, what's your name?" And they'll put you in a notebook. "Oh, yeah, where do you live?" And then they'll tell everybody else, "You see this guy? This guy, see him? He's the one that's going to be in trouble. He's the one," and that's called white tagging or white noting. And depending where you are in the United States, has a different name, but that's exactly what they're doing. They're profiling you. And when I heard that, there were several laws, federal laws, that they were just breaking in state laws, and you're like, really? Number one is the Texas Hate Crime Act, and then they say, "Oh, well, we weren't doing that. You said it, you did it in the presentation. So what is up there? Oh, she meant something else. No, you meant what you meant." So my main thing here is, I know there's bad apples, and I know we have great kids. And I think we all can, as a community, can come together and form a beautiful citizen of society. And it's a parent's job to parent. Some kids are they don't grow up that way. It's just the way life is. You might just get one parent. You might get two parents. You might be split up between two households. But you still have loving parents that love you. So we cannot degrade a child and tell them that you have a deadbeat father or a deadbeat mother, or you're not special because of this, or you're not going to make it because you come from that. You can't do that if you're an educator. You have to educate them correctly. And maybe it's not their fault, it's just the culture. You know? What do you see the most as a problem when you all visit a school, when you all see a school district? What is the number one thing, policy, that you all say, this is the biggest problem policy there is? Which one is? Well, which one would it be?
That's a big question. That's a big question. There's a lot, but just off the top of my head, I think one of the biggest problems would be when schools refer kids to police for any type of misbehavior. So whether it's that they were caught with a vape, whether it's that they were disrupting class, whether they got into a scuffle with another kid, those, for all of those, we see time and time again that schools refer them directly to police. The second that you refer them to police, they're going to be arrested, they're going to be charged, they might be handcuffed, they might not be handcuffed, they might be detained, they might not be detained. So they might be charged, and then, all the consequences that go on from that. So I think that that's probably the biggest, transition point, decision point, right, for a school administrator, is if you refer them to police, you're going to open them up to a myriad of harmful consequences down the line. But if you just choose to deal with that within the school building, make it a teaching moment, make it a learning moment for the kids. Maybe two kids who got in a fight, they just need to have a facilitated discussion to solve their problems, or whatever it is. But dealing with it inside the school is going to be much better for the kids and their future.
That's what you see. We've had stories that kids have been fighting at the mall, and on Monday they go to school and they get arrested by the school police. And you're like, really? It's out of your jurisdiction. Oh, we're Texas peace officers, we can do whatever we want. And that type of rogue overextending of police force, that those issues is wrong. Is wrong. And okay, if they got in a fight and the Laredo Police Department didn't arrest them, is one thing. Why is the school police arresting them days later? They shouldn't be. They didn't get in a fight in the school. Maybe if they got in a fight Friday at the school campus and they didn't find about it until Tuesday, maybe they can do something about it. And still, you can't, in the Constitution, you have the right to face your accuser. Here, you can't face your accuser. We're not in Neopolonic law. So I don't know. Any other questions you guys got?
Yes,
Is it? No, you go first.
you were talking about, we know that policy maybe in some other districts is called differently. Here in UIC we have Crime Stoppers. We've spoken about that same issue you were talking about, and they automatically believe all tips as being factual. Not only is it unconstitutional federally, it's by the state, it's unconstitutional, like you were saying. The accuser, the person has the right to face their accuser, and they're rewarding people that maybe they don't have facts. They heard it from someone else, or they thought they saw something, and now because there's a tip, now they open a criminal investigation and they violate the student's right. They don't read them their Miranda rights. They search them. They do all sorts of violations. You were talking about that, so we've seen that as well. So I know that is a big factor inside school districts.
You know,
I want to ask that sometime by the time the parents get notified, they already the school make a decision what's going to happen to the kid, right?
Yeah.
It's not a process, and I find out that a lot of parents, when they go to the school, they don't know their rights. So sometimes they want to find more information that actually what happened to their kids, and it's kind of they don't get information anywhere. No police report, no how was the encounter, what they spoke to the student. There's no video of the interacting with the principal or the people. What you can do to change those things?
Yeah. I want to address the two in order, and I'm going back to a conference I attended in Irving in August, the school safety conference. Some of our work has revolved around threat assessments over the past 4 years. So in the 86th legislative session in 2019, the Texas legislature passed SB 11 that created school-based threat assessments across the state. And then in the 88th regular legislative session this year in 2023, they passed HB 473, which requires parental involvement in that process. But unfortunately, in what we've seen, America spoke to a parent and a young person from Brownsville in a Texas Observer article that was published a couple of months ago that speaks to how this process can go wrong, both at that school safety conference and in various mechanisms across the state. You know, the Texas Department of Public Safety might advertise some type of Crime Stoppers program, might say, hey, anybody just use the QR code, call this number, and say that you think some crime is occurring. And very much so, like you said, without due process, without really corroborating that tip, you know, law enforcement might move forward very quickly. And we've seen with the threat assessment process how it can move forward in a way that doesn't incorporate parent voice, student voice, might rely on an anonymous tip, you know, more than anything, and then lead to some really detrimental consequences for young people, especially if they're deemed to have made a credible threat, you know, under this law. And then to your question, we've been thinking about our work in big buckets, and one theme that kind of came up is the idea of democratic participation of parents in school governance, which has just not been the case across the 21st century, the 20th century, right? Often parents will find themselves notified after the fact, right? The school district has made their determination, right? The kid's going to a DAEP, they're being suspended, and, you know, if you don't like it, appeal it to the superintendent, but they'll just affirm it. And one thing that I hate to have to do this, right? But we've seen certain cases where parents will be so riled up, and rightfully so, because their children have been mistreated and there's been no due process, that they'll go to the school and ask, you know, what just happened? And then because of their response, the school will turn the police officers on the parents and then charge them, you know, with criminal activity or trespassing or disturbing the peace. And so, you know, when we're thinking about these overarching laws and policies, right, like there are certain things on the books, right, like the fact that parents need to be notified of the threat assessment process we thought was a good change in the law. But overall, it's good to have a community of people to kind of hold you as you're going through this, because, you know, in so many ways the system is focused on trying to divide people up and not have them exercise their rights.
You brought up a great product, you know. During the 1930s, that same laws, similar mandates, similar things were done. If you did not like a certain type of ethnic group that lived in Germany, you all you have to do is call. They'll give you money. They'll go pick up those people and carry them away. That type of laws that we have bring tyranny into this land, and sometimes we think by doing something good that we're actually doing something bad. I understand threats, I understand everything else, I understand what we have to go through, but the way that they're punishing, the way that they're destroying, and they're doing it without any due process, really, and they're doing it with this malicious intent. Once they get a hold of you and they go after everybody, it's pretty awful. And they pick and choose. School districts pick and choose. Okay, we're going to do it to this one. We're not going to do it to this one. And they did the same type of crime. So there is that type of discrimination that is there, and we have to come back to basics, and we have to come back to respecting the Bill of Rights and the Constitution of this United States, and of course the Constitution of Texas. And we have to hold those entities that do that. And if laws like that have been made, we have to go back in there and reshape them to a way that it is not detrimental. Understood. And then people are going to say, no, but what are you talking about? Because I get it. Believe me, I get it. Somebody threatens you, you have all the right. But when you have threats and you have abilities of what something is doing, like, for example, somebody's going to rape somebody and nothing is done, that's a threat. Understand what I'm saying? But if it's the person so-and-so says, oh, you know what, I'm going to do this because he didn't like you, now they go after him punitively and they throw the whole book at him, and so it's a pick and choose of where they want to do. And that has to stop, you know, because there's a nice word that everybody out here should know, and you all should too. It's called Quisling. Quislinger. Okay? It was in Hungary, I believe. A Jewish colonel, I believe, then was Quisling, would pay the other Jews to point the finger at the other Jews. Understand what I'm saying? They'll give certain ones money and they'll cut off the other ones. We had that going on through here with several issues. So we have to I want to get back on track, but those detrimental laws exist that we have to basically go. But those were great questions. Mm-hmm. Any others?
Go ahead.
So if a kid is ever in trouble, like, would it be a good idea to like arm him with like pepper spray or something like that?
No.
No.
Those are threats, and if you take a weapon into the school district, you should do that. You see, one of the questions that was brought up over there was, could you make a police report to the police and say that the threat is happening? Of course, the Laredo Police Department has jurisdiction over that. The problem is that the Laredo Police Department is a lazy police department.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're sending a lazy police department to another lazy police department, and they're not going to do anything about it. That's where we have problems that we get. That's where we get into trouble the way we get.
Yeah, but we would definitely not recommend anybody getting pepper spray to school because they'll be seen as a weapon and they'll probably get in trouble.
Okay, so that's a negative.
What's the percentage of students that are sent to alternative school? What's the percentage of those students ending up in any sort of
Penitentiary? No.
jail or probation? Or I'm pretty sure there's. Do you have a percentage?
That's a really good question. Unfortunately, we don't have like a really good study on that because people don't always. It's very hard to follow the kid's path, right? In doing research, it's very hard for people because the data will be collected by different entities, right? Mm-hmm. Like the school will know when they sent them to alternative school, but then it's going to be, like the juvenile justice department that knows if they went that way, right? Or if they were detained or whatever the case may be. And they don't always like collect the data together. So it's hard for us to see the pathway. And that's one of the problems is that because we don't have the clear data, it's harder for us to show the problem, but we know for sure that this is happening. And so, I think like we have data on how many kids I don't have it in my head, but there is data collected by the state on like how many kids got sent to the DAP by each district, in a particular year. And then separately, the Juvenile Justice Department has like how many kids were charged with this and that, and how many kids were put in detention and stuff like that. But it's hard to link up the pathway.
Yeah. With the investigation you all have done, and I'm pretty sure you visited different districts within the state. How many of those, or how much of those policies that exist are, in your opinion, constitutional or against the state constitution or whatever.
So that's a really good question. One of the problems is our Texas state law is actually not very helpful in this regard.
Right.
Our Texas state law actually set up the system that allows districts to do all of this stuff. So what they're doing doesn't like clearly violate state law a lot of the times, even though to us it violates a lot of constitutional principles that we know. Like those are from the criminal justice system, like when you have a trial. But those same rights don't actually always apply in the school setting. So unfortunately, schools have a lot of discretion and power. And so you were asking, like, how can we change this, right? That parents don't have any say, they don't know what's going on, all of that. It's something that, like, as a community, we have to advocate with our local school district that, look, this is important, and you need to change how you do it in your district. And the only way they're going to feel that pressure is, like, really from the community. Because state law doesn't really protect that way, and then the constitutional rights, they really mostly apply in like a criminal trial context and not really in the school discipline context.
Totally. Absolutely. You have to change. It's multifaceted. You have to change things in the state level. You have to change things in the municipality level. You have to change things in the law enforcement type of what is jurisdictional, what is not. You have to change. There's a lot of things at one time that you can see, and if you can't escape one, because there's like 5-10 different things. There's policies, there's laws that govern peace officers, but there has to be a peace officer law change for the peace officer of a school district to have a jurisdictional cap. It can't be running around all of Webb County and Laredo just arresting people and they're free, even though they say they're peace officers. Because any one of us has a right to arrest. You know, it's called a citizen's arrest. I mean, we can do the same thing to them if need be. But and they'll look at us like we're being too aggressive. But if actually we have the right to arrest, we have a citizen's right. So we need to have jurisdictional caps, and that's it. Boom, you're 300 feet away, or 500 feet away, what have you, from a property of the school, and that's it. You know, because there's a lot of stories that they're arresting kids at the mall and the neighborhoods and stuff, and that shouldn't be. But you had said something that was very going back with the recidivism rate of each county. It's spelled out. There's certain, I think Texas was 24% is the recidivism rate in Texas, but Webb County was 26, 27 on one, 30 on another one. It just depends what charge, who's putting it. Is it federal? Is it state? Is it local? Is it this? So you have to take 2-3 different ones and kind of look at it and kind of say, okay, in ballpark it's about 28, 26, but it's over the state level that we have here in Webb County, in percentage wise, Any others?
So the state of Texas asks the school district have to report how many kids they have annually in the programs. They keep track of how many kids is in trouble.
Yes. They keep track of how many kids they suspended, expulsions, the alternative school, just like different discipline things like that. Each year they report it to the state. And so that's data that's publicly, we can download it from the state website.
That's right. Yeah. That's awesome.
So we could look at LIS.
Yeah. The Texas Education Agency is the state governmental entity that houses this, and the user face is a little tricky on its website, but it's a very helpful tool, as Renica said, and it will break it down by race, by gender, by special education status, in a way that can make compelling arguments to school districts.
Absolutely. It's a great debate, and we'll invite any school district to come together and actually let's find solutions. Because I think everybody needs to come together. It can't be you're attacking one school district, you're attacking me, you're attacking. Once you take it personal, then It's already lost. It's a lost case. It's kind of like if you get mad, if you take it personal, you've already lost it. So this is not about getting emotional. This is about fixing the solution that is there, and everybody has to come down because there's a lot of things that are at play. That not only do you have to change the subculture in the teaching, and you have to change laws and policies, various different laws, and that's not going to be a 1 year thing, 2 year thing. That's going to be they've been at it since the 30 years now, so it's not going to be anytime soon. But what you want is the ability for people to have their rights given back. Because once you lose a right, you lost it. And that's just the way it is. It's going to be very hard to bring it back. And our children have lost their civil rights. Basically, that's what it looks like. What I've seen, what I've witnessed. And they could care less. They're like, well, we could do whatever we want. Oh, really? Okay. I've seen changes of police reports. I've seen lying from the police officers. I've seen it's incredible the munches in there. And I'm not picking police officers out there, that's per se, because we have some very good police officers out there. We have some excellent badges. It's just that we have to protect the good badges. And that's what it boils down to. We have to protect the good badges, and those that are knuckleheads, we have to push them out. Can't be there, People's survival is that. And that's a big culture that we change. So we have to change a lot of things. So it's not just one person, it's not one addict, it's everybody. And I want to thank you all for coming down. I want to thank you guys for sticking around and doing this, because this is an important issue, because a lot of people here in Laredo think it's an urban legend, think it's like the Llorona, and it's like, it's not. It is something that it's alive and kicking, and it's in our face. And we have to, for the benefit of our children, their children, this is what's going to happen, So I want to thank you guys once more time. Okay? And guys, we'll leave you with this. You all stay safe, be safe, and God bless you until next time. Much peace.
One of the reasons I joined Buitron Academy here and enrolled my son is the legitimacy of the school.
No tenemos palabras maravillosas, sinceramente no tenemos ninguna palabra negativa, estamos totalmente agradecidos. Lo único que yo podría decir como madre es que se animen completamente a venir a traer a sus hijos aquí a la academia. Totalmente, es una experiencia muy bonita.
Overall, the academy is I've had a great experience with it. And I would encourage anyone who would want to become a better version of themselves to join.